pendant cette période-là, ils disent eux-mêmes qu'ils sont au fond du trou, qu'ils sont dans un état parfois même de désespoir. Et 2 heures après, parce que le médicament agit de nouveau, eh bien, ils disent ça y est, je suis en pleine forme. Parfois, ils sont même un peu excités. On parle parfois même d'état un peu maniaque. Donc, il y a ces fluctuations d'humeur qui montrent que finalement, on ne peut pas résumer toute cette circuiterie à son seul aspect moteur. C'est finalement un effet comportemental global, à la fois sur la motricité, sur l'humeur, sur la motivation, sur la pulsion à agir, et ce qui montre que c'est beaucoup plus complexe que cela, et que c'est un ensemble qui nous pousse à agir, à nous mobiliser dans l'action.
Mais on dit souvent dans le grand public que la dopamine, c'est un peu le neurotransmetteur du plaisir, de la bonne humeur. On se trompe, au contraire, c'est bien ça, et donc tout est lié à la fois cette fonction motrice et cette fonction sur notre humeur générale de la dopamine.
Je crois qu'effectivement, il ne faut pas le limiter simplement, il ne faut pas limiter son action aux aspects purement moteurs. Je pense que dans l'aspect d'ailleurs motivationnel, motif, il y a cette notion de moteur et de motivation.
Because motivation is another way of movement, actually.
Joue aussi sur d'autres systèmes activateurs, et notamment les systèmes qui interviennent avec les régions limbiques et les régions frontales, qui sont impliquées dans la volonté, dans le drive, dans la mise en action, et les émotions aussi. Donc je crois qu'effectivement, ce film est très très intéressant, très intelligent, parce qu'il montre que cet éveil est complexe. Et je sais que j'avais travaillé chez Le Moal, et on faisait les lésions dopaminergiques, nigrostriatales et ventrale. Et quand on donnait, j'avais dit à Louis Sinus, il faudrait qu'on donne des biscuits dans lesquels il y a de la dopamine, etc. Alors, et à un moment donné, Sarah qui était dans cette situation comme ça, il était comme ça, il grignotait un truc, c'est comme ça,
these mice that were blocked, and suddenly
ils se mettaient à redevenir des rats. Et c'était très troublant parce qu'on se demandait que finalement sur quoi on agit. Est-ce qu'on agit sur la motricité? Est-ce qu'on agit sur le
sur le comportement général? Merci Bruno. Richard Fakovat, de toute façon je voulais vous donner la parole. Où est-ce qu'on en est de la connaissance des causes du Parkinson? D'ailleurs, vous dites que Parkinson c'est un ensemble de maladies. Il faudrait mieux parler de parkinsonisme avec plusieurs types de Parkinson, c'est ça, plutôt qu'une seule maladie?
We should talk about the Parkinsonian syndrome, because there are various types of Parkinson's disease.
C'est la maladie de Parkinson.
What we saw is what we used to call Parkinson's disease.
Le syndrome
But today,
de Parkinson.
we speak
On
of
peut pas dire parkinsonisme.
Syndrome or
Et pourquoi?
Parkinsonism.
On a vu dans le film de Jocelyne
qu'il
y avait proposé un système où il y avait déjà 4 ou 5 branches. Imaginez une voiture avec sa mécanique. On peut changer quelque chose ici, ça marche, mais mal. On peut changer quelque chose là, ça s'arrête. On peut changer quelque chose là, ça explose. Alors, on est passé maintenant dans une nouvelle ère où on ne parle pas des maladies, sauf si on connaît la cause. Et c'est très intéressant, là, on a parlé de la cause de l'encéphalite. Qu'est-ce que ça veut dire encéphalite? Ça veut dire une série de choses que le médecin voyait à ce moment-là. Il montrait qu'il y avait des anomalies dans le liquide céphalorachidien, peut-être aussi le voilà, la maladie est un encéphalite. C'était un syndrome participé qui se manifestait différemment dans différents individus, dépendant de la cause de l'encéphalite. Là, l'encéphalite, après la pandémie dite espagnole, mais il y a des encéphalites, surtout maintenant on parle de la rougeole, surtout chez Trampland. Bon, la rougeole, 20 ans après, si on l'a, peut causer des problèmes majeurs et même la mort cérébrale. Donc, l'idée qu'il y a un virus qui peut causer des lésions dans différentes parties dans ce mécanisme, il faut toujours garder ça dans la tête. La question à poser à votre médecin, c'est est-ce que c'est la maladie de Parkinson qu'on connaît très très bien, on utilise la dopa, et quand la dopa ne marche pas, on utilise la stimulation, ou est-ce que c'est un syndrome parkinsonien? Et si c'est un syndrome, qu'est-ce qu'on va faire, monsieur? Bon, on va d'abord commencer avec la L-dopa, mais on va faire plein d'autres choses. Ça, c'est très important. La deuxième chose que je voulais dire, beaucoup brièvement, c'est que par le passé, des médecins et des infirmiers et infirmières pouvaient faire ce qu'ils ont fait ici. Maintenant, si le malade est capable de parler, de communiquer comme ce malade faisait, il aurait pu dire « Laissez-moi tranquille, je pars sous ma propre responsabilité ». C'est le malade qui est au centre des choses, ce n'est pas le médecin. Les médecins accompagnent si le malade le veut. Et donc, si ce film se faisait aujourd'hui, le malade qui voulait partir, il était peut-être un petit danger, mais autrement, il aurait pu sortir. Donc, il ne faut pas penser que c'est comme ça que les médecins, n'est-ce pas, se comportent avec leurs malades. C'est le malade qui est au centre de la chose.
Sauf dans les institutions psychiatriques.
Non, ça dépend de ce que tu veux dire par psychiatrie. Là, quand il est éveillé, il n'a pas de maladie psychiatrique. Ce n'est pas une maladie psychiatrique.
Oui, il peut être
malade. Il peut avoir dans le syndrome, il peut avoir un composant majeur qui est psychiatrique, et à ce moment-là, bien sûr, on change d'approche. Mais c'est ça l'idée de syndrome et de maladie.
Merci beaucoup, Richard. Alors, avant une pause sûrement bienvenue, y a-t-il des questions dans la salle au sujet de la maladie de Parkinson et de ses traitements? On va rallumer la lumière. Oui, madame, je vois tout de suite ici au centre du 6e rang. Merci. Voilà.
Bonjour. Moi, je voulais savoir si est-ce qu'on connaît la cause de la maladie de Parkinson et Alzheimer? On a compris pourquoi ça arrive, quelles sont les causes?
Alors, on ne va pas spoiler Alzheimer, qui va faire l'objet, on va y revenir longuement dans la deuxième partie de cet après-midi, sur les causes de cette dégénérescence à l'origine du Parkinson. Qui veut répondre?
Qui est connu, qui est avéré, il y avait plusieurs en Amérique de l'Ouest et Sud, le NMDA, qui était une molécule que les jeunes utilisaient, se fabriquaient eux-mêmes pour faire des bonnes choses, des hallucinations, le sexe, des trucs vraiment sympas.
C'est ce qu'on connaît sous le nom d'ecstasy.
Ils sont tombés dans un parkinsonisme. Ça a été assez vite compris, ils ont arrêté de le faire, ça a disparu. Les autres, on ne sait pas. Sur la maladie d'Alzheimer, n'oubliez pas, l'Alzheimer, c'est le syndrome de l'Alzheimer. Il y a très probablement 60 différentes, sinon plus, de causes de la dégénérescence de type Alzheimer qui causent un syndrome qui est similaire, par exemple les boxeurs à la fin de vie, les rugbymen, parce qu'il y a un match maintenant, donc je pense à eux. Mais la cause fondamentale de la maladie d'Alzheimer n'existe pas, donc ce n'est pas une maladie, c'est un syndrome.
Oui, bien sûr, Yves.
Je peux rajouter un mot pour compléter ce que tu viens de dire, c'est que, en fait, une maladie dégénérative, vous avez parlé de Parkinson, d'Alzheimer, mais il y a des maladies, il y a des atteintes dégénératives de toutes les différentes parties du système nerveux. Il y a des nerfs qui donnent, il y a le cervelet, etc., avec des maladies très particulières. Ça, c'est quand, au fond, c'est une espèce de vieillissement accéléré, attention, très particulier, qui touche des petites parties du système nerveux, pas tout. L'encéphalite, elle touche tout. Là, c'est des parties très particulières. Mais il faut bien comprendre que ce vieillissement pathologique, si vous voulez, pour résumer, on ne connaît pas les causes. Il y en a plusieurs. On pourrait en parler dans le détail. Il y a à la fois des causes, des prédispositions génétiques, pour résumer, et il y a manifestement des facteurs environnementaux qui n'ont pas été identifiés. Mais le message que je voudrais donner, que je trouve fondamental, c'est qu'il en est de même pour le vieillissement. Vous autres, vous vieillissez tous, on vieillit tous. On ne connaît rien, on ne sait rien du vieillissement, de quelque organe que ce soit. Et je le dis souvent comme ça en manière de plaisanter, on ne sait même pas pourquoi un cheveu devient blanc. Alors les dames s'arrangent pour utiliser des colorants, c'est très bien. Les hommes les hommes ne le font pas, mais on ne sait pas ralentir même le vieillissement d'un cheveu. C'est quand même fou. C'est dire que c'est compliqué.
On n'aura probablement pas l'occasion d'en reparler. Je voudrais simplement compléter la réponse de Richard sur la maladie d'Alzheimer pour répondre précisément à votre question, parce que je crois que vous avez abordé la question de la maladie d'Alzheimer aussi. Bon, il faut distinguer deux choses, si vous voulez. La maladie d'Alzheimer que l'on voit chez des sujets parfois assez jeunes, autour de 60, 65 ans, 70 ans, c'est vrai. Et ça, cette maladie, elle est bien caractérisée. Et on sait qu'il y a, au départ de cette maladie, une protéine anormale, qui est la protéine amyloïde, et qui enclenche un certain nombre de phénomènes qui aboutit à un tableau qui est maintenant bien identifié, qui associe des troubles cliniques très précis avec une biologie très précise, et c'est la maladie d'Alzheimer. Alors, chez des gens plus âgés, il y a aussi cette maladie, mais elle est associée à ce qu'on appelle des copathologies, parce qu'avec l'âge, on voit aussi des lésions, notamment vasculaires, et ce qui fait qu'il y a une sorte de tableau qui devient un peu plus compliqué, un peu plus confus. Il y a aussi d'autres anomalies, d'autres biomarqueurs que l'on trouve. Il y a des croisements, il y a des chevauchements entre différentes pathologies, ce qui fait qu'à 80 ans, 85 ans, 90 ans, les tableaux sont un peu moins purs, si vous voulez. Mais la maladie d'Alzheimer est maintenant bien identifiée et on la connaît bien. Et alors, on ne connaît pas le mécanisme qui est tout à fait au départ, mais on connaît, si vous voulez, la suite des événements qui aboutit à un syndrome clinique qui est maintenant bien identifié et à une biologie qui est maintenant bien établie. Et on fait ça très bien ici, à la consultation mémoire de Monaco, de Madame Lachapelle.
Merci beaucoup Bruno. On va prendre une dernière question avant la pause parce qu'on a un horaire à respecter. Je pense qu'elle sera bienvenue. Oui, Madame.
Oui. J'avais une question. Non, c'est pas Madame.
Ah, pardon, monsieur. Je voyais pas.
C'est par là.
Ah, pardon.
Ah non, c'est pas Madame.
Voilà, on prend deux dernières questions. Voilà, et on passe par vous, monsieur. Pardon.
Vous nous parlez du syndrome parkinsonien. Peut-on englober le trouble bipolaire dans ce syndrome? Ou est-ce qu'on caractérise la maladie bipolaire?
To be seen within this Parkinson's syndrome or not? Now, when you talk about Parkinson's, the fourth pillar are disorders, human disorders. So could the bipolar disorder be associated? No. It is a totally different disease with various states, depressive or agitated. And when we talk about the non-motor aspect of Parkinson's disease, it means depression, sometimes very severe depression at the beginning of the disease, that can lead to a first consultation in some patients. And sometimes we have patients that have a fairly atypical depression where you discover that actually the patient has the very beginning of a Parkinson's disease. The bipolar disorder can be also triggered by drugs, but not all of them. So again, it is a syndrome and not a disease. And a bipolar person or attitude that is triggered by a drug, you can classify the various types of bipolar disorders. But again, I wouldn't speak of a disease, but of a syndrome. Thank you very much for this conference that is very accessible. In vulgarization literature, we read very often that environment and pollution have an incidence on Parkinson's disease. Have you seen a link in your research between the two? And we've seen also there's a link between the gut and the brain in patients, in lab animals that have been injected with the proteins. So you have, in very few cases, an hereditary picture. But most of these cases are cases where there's no one in the family that is already affected. So it can be a bacteria, a prion, a parasite, or a pollutant, something from the environment. So what do we know about environmental factors for Parkinson's disease? We know two things. First of all, the accumulation of some pesticides in farmers, for example. In some regions, when you have very high concentration of pesticides, some farmers are going to have Parkinson's disease, as if it was a triggering factor. So it is possible that it contributes to the development of Parkinson's disease. And the neurosurgery approach can only be used in very few cases. But on the other hand, we have found a correlation that is quite the opposite. For example, with the consumption of cigarettes. Smokers are less likely to have Parkinson's disease, and it has been proved again and again. Oh, you're going to give bad ideas to quite a few people. So, well, don't try to have a lung cancer in order to avoid the Parkinson's disease. But really, thank you for the question, because we do not know what is the environmental factor that is responsible. It is possible that here in this room, in the air, we have some substances that will act on some people. It's not the direct cause, but it can trigger the whole process of the disease. And this is where we get to artificial intelligence, because when you have a syndrome with various complex mechanisms, we can identify various types and make experiments in order to find the triggering factor. Thank you so much. Coffee break, and we start again at 4:30.
Neil.
Barbara, il y a
320, on m'a dit, au tout début, mais entre-temps, il y en a beaucoup.
Tout le monde est là? Oui. On va laisser aux dernières personnes le temps de s'asseoir. Après cette pause bienvenue, nous abordons...
After this welcome coffee break, we come to our third theme, coma and neurological rehabilitation. I'm going to ask Jocelyne Bloch, Bruno Dubois, Stephen Lawrence, and David Zekili to come to the stage, as well as Stephen Lawrence from Canada. After a long career in Belgium. So we're going to start with a film excerpt, a quite striking film about a man who has to reconstruct himself after a brain trauma.
une belle leçon de vie. Donc, Jocelyne, ce film, c'est la reconstruction d'un homme après un trauma crânien. On voit dans les premiers temps cette équipe médicale qui se presse à son chevet pour essayer de le réanimer, d'empêcher qu'il ne tombe dans le coma. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Qu'est-ce qu'on fait à la clinique dans les premiers instants qui suivent un trauma crânien comme celui-ci?
D'accord, alors pour ça, j'aurais besoin de quelques diapos. Voilà, donc le traumatisme crânio-cérébral, c'est une pathologie, on va dire, bien trop fréquente. On en voit arriver presque tous les jours dans les services de neurochirurgie. Et qu'est-ce que je vais vous montrer un peu ce qu'on peut retrouver. Donc quand quelqu'un a eu un accident, il y a plusieurs cas de figure. Ça, c'est le cas le moins sévère. On fait une fracture du crâne et puis il y a du sang qui va se collecter entre le crâne et le cerveau. Donc on appelle ça un hématome épidural. Il y a un deuxième cas de figure, un peu plus grave, vous allez voir, où le sang va se collecter entre la méninge et le cerveau. Et c'est très souvent accompagné de contusion cérébrale. Comme vous le voyez ici, c'est l'hématome sous-dural, souvent plus sévère, et qui s'accompagne de contusion cérébrale. Et vous voyez que le cerveau souffre beaucoup plus. Le troisième cas de figure, c'est la contusion cérébrale, c'est-à-dire que c'est en soi le cerveau qui va recevoir le coup. Donc vous voyez ici, marche plus, la contusion cérébrale. Voilà ici. Donc en fait, l'objectif du neurochirurgien, parce que vous l'imaginez, quand on a une contusion cérébrale ou un hématome épidural,
has the objective to save the brain, because an hematoma, a contusion, whatever, compresses the brain. The brain is in a kind of box, the skull, that cannot be expanded. And if you have a contusion, the brain tries to escape where there is least resistance. And from there you have a secondary lesion, because the hematoma compresses the brain that tries to escape, and it leads to a vicious circle. So first of all, the surgeon has to withdraw the hematoma in order to prevent the pressure on the brain. So the objective is to decrease the pressure within the skull. Sometimes taking away even a piece of skull itself. So that goes for the first days, sometimes the first weeks. The patients are in intensive care, and we observe how they awake. After the acute phases, when the brain unswells, we observe the consequences of the trauma. We spoke of the Glasgow scale. We see if the awakening is fine or less fine, and according to the way he awakes, we'll need various types of rehabilitations. Thank you so much. So when you say the patient awakes, it means it goes through a coma phase. Does it mean that the patient is conscious or unconscious? What is coma, and how do you get out of coma, naturally or artificially? After a cranial trauma or a brain stroke or a heart stroke, coma is when you cannot wake up the patient. So we have someone who is in intensive care where you have various possible scenarios. You have cerebral death, when you have too much pressure and the whole of the brain is damaged irreversibly. So we are more and more able to avoid this type of scenario, even if it still happens. So it's linked to organ donation. It can happen to anyone, and we can save lives through organ donation. Then you have cases where through the various exams with MRI or the measurement of electrical activity of the brain, you see there is no cerebral death, but it is nevertheless irreversible, and the team and the physician decides to stop care. What happens in intensive care is people who die there are people who the team, the physicians let die because there is no hope of saving them. And then you have the people who are saved. They open their eyes, but they do not have a lot of reaction. People used to talk of vegetative status. For example, you put a question like, can we shake hands? And there is no reaction. So for some people, for about a third of them, you have more going on. It's what we call a minimal state of consciousness. That's very difficult because there is some consciousness, and we do not know how far or whether these people can recuperate. And in some cases they can, as we have seen in the film, in order to offer these patients a life that is worth living. So we have all these various modified consciousness states with a long period of rehabilitation afterwards. We read very often of people who can get out of coma after years. Is it extremely rare, or does it happen? No, we know more and more, and we know how to stimulate neuroplasticity of the brain. So this is the reproduction of a human brain. It is actually a human brain that has gone through plastification, and today, since this is the Women's Rights Day, it is a women's brain. Things have changed. When I was at university, we were taught that the brain was plastic, and we thought that we just lost neurons with time. But today we know that we make new cells, but also new connections. And if we memorize something, for example, from this conference, it will change some of the neurons. So we have the possibility through neuromodulation, neurostimulation, or medication to change and to stimulate the activity of the brain. So it is possible to have patients who are able to wake up after a long period of coma. Bruno Dubois, we see in the case of the patient in the film that he has a shock, the frontal lobe. What is the zone that has been damaged, and how can it be healed? We have to go back on the story. This man has changed enormously. He has no inhibition, he's more violent. He has changed enormously. He's not the man he used to be. So this trauma alters his true nature. And very briefly, it reminds me of an observation by John Harlow, a physician that followed a patient that had a wound in the frontal area, and he followed him for 15 years, and the conclusion of his thesis is Gage, that is, the patient is no longer what it was. So if we are what we are, it's because of this specific region of the brain. When Eve makes a joke, we recognize him. We recognize him. So we have a kind of signature in our behavior, and we express what we are through our behavior. So let me take this female brain with caution. So I would like to propose my own vision of the two hemispheres. In the old days, one talked of a dichotomy between the left and the right half of the brain. We tended to say that emotions were or more on the right-hand side and mathematics on the left-hand side. So I would like to propose another dichotomy with the posterior brain that receives and handles all the information and send it to the frontal brain that works like a platform that can also bring back memories in order to take the right decision. We integrate all the parameters in our behavior. For example, the small joke I made, it was completely controlled because I knew I was able to do it. We have all the codes of our society in order to give adapted answers to a situation. And the frontal lobe is the part of the brain that enables us to have the optimal attitude and enables us to adapt in a complex society. And the patients that have an alteration of the frontal lobe are not able any longer to know or to be aware of all the codes, so their understanding is not so good anymore, and so their behavior is not entirely adapted. This is why the wife is not able to face a situation, the new situation. And why can't he change his behavior? Because he's not conscious of it. Because if he were, he would modify it. So this is really the drama of these patients. They no longer have this filter that enables us to have this contact with our environment. And the film really tells very well what the story is. It is a very realistic film in the reconstruction of the patient that has such a trauma. So disinhibition is shown very crudely in the film. Very often the sexual disinhibition is not as brutal as we've seen in the film. So female brain, male brain. I have a question. Is there a difference between a male and a female brain that we can see? Or can you see it through your models? So if you look at them very, very carefully. When you weigh brains, the female brain is somewhat smaller because women are smaller, but if you have more in-depth analysis, men have more glial cells. You're going to tell me that they are very important, these glial cells, but neurons are also very important. So less neurons in men proportionally. So in the end, I think it's about 50-50 in both. We don't have a microphone for the speaker, unfortunately. Let's go back to the observation by Rita Montalcini's father in the first film. If we have many brains that we can study, we can, through artificial intelligence, say whether it is a female or a male brain. But today, in this new Trump era, it is extremely important to insist on women's rights and all the challenges, because we still have few women that have a Nobel Prize or that are head of a lab, and it's not because of their brains, obviously. Thank you, Stephen. David Zekili.
You deal with these patients who suffered trauma, and you said when we were preparing things this afternoon that you were struck by the following. Even if behavior changes after the accident, you can establish a link between the pre-existing terrain before the treatment and the personality which is devised and modified after the trauma. And this is a thought that occurred to me when I saw the film, which I wasn't familiar with. If you look at the traits which are magnified by the frontal problem, he becomes very aggressive, he becomes rough, with huge sex drive. If you look at the film in the first images in the extract, you can see that he's someone who's impulsive. He grabs the wheel in a very dangerous way. It seems that he didn't have his seatbelt on either. He took a decision in a very strange manner. You can't see it in the excerpt, but he also uses drugs. He has smoken joints for quite some time, no doubt, and drinks large amounts of alcohol. So I wonder about this impulsiveness, this orbitofrontal brain, and the reward circuits. People who have a drug abuse disorder, we're not going to talk about a disease, but these people tend to be very impulsive. They find it difficult to take decisions. And in terms of brain connections, here the connections are halted by the contusion, the brain contusion and the frontal syndrome. But they already have connection circuits which have become fragile. You don't see anything special on an MRI, but in a functional MRI, you can see, and stop me if I'm saying something incorrect, one realizes that the connectivity between the orbitofrontal brain, the most anterior part of the brain, and the subcortical circuits is less functional than in most other people. You find this in sociopaths. There are more male sociopaths than women. People who attempt suicide, someone who has suicidal thoughts has a brain connectivity which is not very far removed from that of someone who's not in a depression at that time, even if there are anomalies, but there are specific circuits when it comes to impulsiveness, which are actually the signature of going on to commit suicide. You can have suicidal ideas and then move on to real suicide. And this is linked to a trouble and disorder in decision-making. This is very characteristic of these people. So I wonder, maybe he was already a very impulsive person. He had behavioral disorders. At the beginning of the film, you can see he takes toxic substances, drugs quite often. This may have had an impact on this hypersexuality, this major aggressiveness, and the emotional reactivity, which is very pathological. I wondered about that. This observation is very interesting. I'd like to tell you about what has been observed, and I think this raises a real question. We have seen that in children who very young, very early in their development, have an impairment of the frontal lobe, they cannot acquire this social integration. They become acquired sociopaths. The frontal lesion prevents us from setting up the reward-punishment system. That is, the mother's smile that reinforces the right behavior. And then if she scolds the child, you change your behavior. This system is set in place bit by bit and enables us to function in a complex society. Yet these young children who have an alteration in this frontal area cannot acquire this system, and they become sociopaths. They can't integrate in society. This social behavioral code is really printed into the brain. No, it's a structure that you acquire as you develop. That's why gradually we learn to control our frustrations. We accept that other people may have a different idea from ours. The structure is gradually put into place, and we become gradually more subtle people and can adapt to a very complex world. Thank you, Bruno. David Sekeli, you apply magnetic stimulation on a lot of your patients. I don't know whether you do it specifically to trauma patients, but there's work which shows that stimulation may facilitate the reconstruction of these patients. I use magnetic stimulation and DC stimulation for psychiatric pathologies and not neurological pathologies or rehabilitation. But indeed, these are things that do exist. As Émilie said, the brain is very plastic, so we can play around with this neuroplasticity. And one way of doing so is to use an electrical current. Either you position electrodes on the patient's brain to polarize the neurons and force them to recreate connections, or you send little magnetic impulses through the brain in specific circuits in order to stimulate them and force them to recreate connections. That's what we refer to as neuroplasticity. You can target the right circuit in order to rectify the circuits that have become sort of disconnected. You can reactivate the cortical circuits with other circuits, superficial circuits with far deeper circuits, in other words. I don't have this specific experience in the rehabilitation of a brain injury, but in literature you have a certain number of papers, particularly using transcranial magnetic stimulation, not so much DC stimulation, but there are a number of studies underway around the world. This morning I saw there are about 30 studies which recruit patients. Some have finished recruiting patients, and in the months and years to come, we'll probably see a certain number of publications using this technique, often added to cognitive stimulation. You stimulate patients using various techniques. The detail doesn't matter. You hold a daily session for 2, 3, or 4 weeks, and at the same time, the patient is stimulated by a neuropsychologist with cognitive tasks on a computer. You can do cognitive training using a computer, and you compare the patients who are stimulated using this technique versus patients who in fact got a placebo technique to compare whether adding neurostimulation reinforces the neuroplasticity of the brain. It may be quite promising. Sometimes you have cognitive disorders. Sometimes you get headaches after brain trauma. In clinics, we see a number of these patients. The headaches are almost secondary because there's so many other things that have to be rectified. But in terms of quality of life, headaches are a real issue. A lot of people with brain trauma, slight brain trauma, develop headaches, which are very persistent, and magnetic stimulation seems to be a promising path. And memory disorders, too, which seem to be an interesting target. You can improve recognition and memory, rather, in these patients. Thank you, Stephen. We'll take some questions from the room. I'd like to react. We have this neuromodulation technique now. We can stimulate the neuroplasticity in this manner using magnets and electric currents together with cognitive tasks and also robotics. With our team in our clinic, we get quite good results with brain injury, ranging from coma to other brain commotions, and neuromodulation can help to improve quality of life in these patients, even those with concussion. Questions in the room? Thank you. I have a fairly general question. The theme of this conference is the cerebral woman. My question is the following. On a functional level, in daily tasks, do women's brains work differently in terms of circuits from men's brains? Is there a mode of functioning that is different in the brain, depending on gender or the type of person? We have indeed dealt with this topic quite extensively. I'd like to see what our guests think. Basically, the circuits are the same, roughly speaking. They function in the same manner, and that's what's very interesting. In detail, of course, there are specificities. People have different interests, different motivations for this or that. Some people have a visual memory that's huge. The way in which you deploy all these abilities depends on the person, but overall there is no difference in brain functioning between men and women. Hello. Thank you for this edifying conference. I have a question on explosive intermittent disorders. Is this a mental disease? Is it hereditary? Intermittent explosive disorder. It's a mental disorder. It's a behavioral disorder. Is it hereditary? Not as far as I know. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Some people have bouts of major anger, and this spontaneously resolves, particularly using antidepressants that can limit the explosiveness. But it's a bit of a mixed bag because you can't say this is due to depression with irritability or anger. You can't put this down necessarily either to a sociopath personality. It's not a problem of a neurological disorder or an impaired intellect. With a frontal disorder, you can't manage your emotions very well. So The intermittent idea is quite important. Intermittence means that you revert to the normal state. That means behind all this, there is no structural disorder of a major nature. It's a bit functional. It comes and goes. The fact that the person reverts to normal is quite reassuring. In this case, one can stimulate this neuroplasticity. There are connections in the brain which can change because you give pharmacological treatment. That's neuromodulation. But also, you have what we do every day, our daily habits, the impact of sleep as well, physical activity, and techniques like meditation, which reduce stress. And they do have an impact that's been proven by scientific studies. This enables patients to play a more active and central role in medicine today. I think it's increasingly clear that you have to combine all these two areas. So these people need to sleep well. That's very important, yes. We'll no doubt go back to that topic. Thank you. Any other questions? I'd like to round this off. Neuroplasticity can't be achieved through neurostimulation or drugs. Psychotherapy and other methods enable the brain to adapt. You have strategies to develop, to better control outbursts of anger. Psychotherapy, for example, is very useful in this area. Thank you, David. Two final questions. People diagnosed with certain disorders, do they have different brain circuitry from others? HPI, I don't know whether this is a synonym for what you said. Yes, there are brain connections which are different. The connectivity is different in people. HPI or zebra, however you want to call them. Brain imaging techniques tend to highlight this point. For years now, I've been wondering about this. I have a nephew who had an accident at the age of 6 with a major brain trauma, and when he woke up, he didn't respond apart from to some noises, the voice of his mother and grandmother, for example. And we were said that perhaps there were some cells that could have replaced the cells that had been damaged. Now he's 23, and he's never totally recovered. Is it true that a child can recover better than an adult or not? Because in his case, it wasn't true. People said that he would recover as a child, but this is not what actually happened. If you look at neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to recover after a trauma, children have greater neuroplasticity, but of course then you have the biological reality. Some cases are more extreme than others. There are different possibilities for the brain. If there's an injury in one part, the cells around can replace the function that's been impaired, or the other side. But obviously, everyone is different. What you said also is that he responded to certain emotional stimuli, the mother's voice, for example. That's something we know quite well, the importance of emotions, using the patient's first name. Sometimes you see patients who react to a joke, and that's the first time you see that they're more conscious, or music, likewise. We've shown through neuroimaging that when you play the child or adult's favorite music, there is an activation of the brain, which is quite extraordinary. So we can clearly see the impact of these stimuli, these emotional stimuli. Unfortunately, the interpreter can't hear what's being said because no microphone is being used.
Il y a aussi des limites.
Answer, there are also limits. You have the brain is resilient but fragile at the same time. That's why we have to increase efforts to prevent this kind of accident. You have to take care of your brain. Thank you. One very last question. It's not a question. I think unanimously we're very pleased to attend this conference. We're not doctors, and we're beginning to understand the brain a little bit better. Thank you. I have something to tell you. And it's similar to what you were saying earlier on. My husband had justement a stroke at Pasteur Hospital. And he was 75 years old. I was called at 4 a.m. to ask if he could donate his organs. And I said, it's too late. He's 75. People don't know that there is no age limit to donate organs. And I think it's very important to convey this message and make it better known. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we'll now wind up this third part. Stephen, stay with us. Thank you, David. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Jocelyne. Last part, which is as interesting as the preceding ones, consciousness, sleep, and dreams. I'd like to ask Isabelle Arnouf, who's in charge of sleep disorders in Paris, to join us here. And Pierre Magistretti, could you please come back to the podium? We're going to watch a last excerpt from a film. It's a beautifully shot film by Christopher Nolan in a society where you can impact the consciousness of people in order to share dreams. I'm sure that all people who love the cinema are familiar with Inception. And here you have an excerpt of the film.
Voilà, un film qu'il faut regarder, je crois, dans son entièreté pour en saisir.
Well, it's a film that has to be seen in its entirety in order to understand what it is about. But Isabelle Arnolf, you told me just before we started that there is a form of dream that is not so well known, and that is called the lucid dream. So what is it exactly? So the dream is extremely cinematographic because you have images and feelings and the script and strange things that happen in dreams. And this is possibly why we're so interested in dreams, because it is really unusual compared to daily lives. Many of them are ordinary, but we remember the extraordinary ones. And what does Leonardo DiCaprio? It's what is called lucid dream. Normally when you dream, you believe in the script that's going on, but sometimes we are actually aware that we are dreaming. And some people manage to keep sleeping, but become sort of spectator of their own dream. So that's the first level of lucid dream. The second one is the capacity to modify some elements of the dream. And so, some people are able to change elements, like, for example, I don't like this house, I'm going to change houses. And then you have the third level, where people can not only change some elements, but can also emit a signal to the researcher. So that's extremely precious for us. So between 5 and 7 a.m. in paradoxical sleep, people are really deeply asleep. And the lucid dream is able to send a signal to the researcher, which means that we were able to spot this element, and the dreamers, the lucid dreamers, send signals that we can use in our investigation. When we are in paradoxical dream, we cannot move except the eyes and breathing. So before sleeping, we can say, for example, if you know you're dreaming, move your eyes from right to left and vice versa. And so we can record the movement of the eyes in the lab. So it's as if the dreamer would send us a kind of telegram. And then we tell these people before they get to sleep, in your dream, well, think of a swimming pool, for example, at some stage. And we have someone where you can see that he stops breathing because he's diving into a swimming pool. So these dreams have an impact on the real body. And very recently, we've asked a lucid dreamer to send us information about the emotions that they feel in the dream. For example, if you have a positive emotion, you can send us 3 very small smiles, for example, and with very sensitive senses, we were able to record these very slight movements around the mouth or the eyes. So we have this information in real time, because the main problem with dream is that we forget them, and sometimes we remember the last dream we have in the morning, but it is obviously a problem for research, because we can't work on memories that about when we're not sure of them. So we've really made progress on lucid dreams. We've been able to get into the bedroom of someone who is sleeping and dreaming, and we're able to ask questions, and we got the answer not through speech, but with eye movements. For example, do you like chocolate? So we said, if you like chocolate while you dream, give us 3 small smiles. So which means that the person is dreaming, but because you had spoken about chocolate beforehand, this person is able to think about the chocolate and smile 3 times. Yes, for example, we had this dreamer who was in a party in her dream, and the person remembered the question about the chocolate, which means that the person is at the same time in his or her inner world and also still have a connection with the outer world. So we were able to progress on normal people, in inverted commas, and so while we are sleeping, it's like a submarine, 100 meters underneath the surface, and there, from time to time, it's as if we would have a periscope that goes up to the surface, and we have these instants of consciousness in dreams, and this is really thanks to lucid dream. And the second technique, and we can try to answer Leonardo DiCaprio's question on time in dreams. We're going to research the behavior of people while we're asleep. So we film in infrared, so we have black and white videos. So this person is in paradoxical sleep, so it should be paralyzed. But in this person, this paralysis is not complete. So can you launch the video, please? Normally people have their eyes closed, but you can see this person has movements, and when he wakes up, he will tell us, well, there was a dog that was attacking me, and I tried to send him away. So it is, obviously we're able to have such movements while we're dreaming, but in our sleep. But here you have this ex-smoker who is smoking the oxygen captor or sensor, and even if he doesn't tell us what he's talking about, I know he's smoking in his dream, and he's even putting out the cigarettes. So you see, the movement is not really more rapid than in normal movement. So, and here, what is this person doing in the dream? What do you think? We can even see what he is eating. He's eating a sandwich, and it's just a normal speed. He's staring with the paper. So this is a real video of someone who is sleeping. So we can really make these images come true. So, well, these are rare models, but powerful ones for research. And in the deep sleep phase, you have, for example, sleep walkers, and we have this guy who suddenly dreams that a lorry is approaching, and is crying for help as he wakes up. So is about to exit the dream, but you have for a small amount of time both worlds, the outer world and the dreams, that are that coexist. So we understand better what is the speed of dreams and their content. And third technique is to listen to people who talk while they sleep. Here you have someone talking in paradoxical sleep. They even shouts. So very often night speech is vulgar, much more than when we're awake. So maybe there is also a symptom of disinhibition, but so the sentences are correct grammatically, and if you have a break, it is after a question. What do you think? Too expensive? The answer being no. It's as if people were talking on the phone. That is to say that you have silence when the people they are talking to in the dream speak. So it means that the whole cognitive system is present, even if some of these dreamers stutter when they speak in dreams. And then we turn to emotions. Well, sleep has various functions, and mainly the regulation of emotions. When you have a very unpleasant email, if you answer immediately, very often you very often induce a negative reaction. So it's much better to sleep over it and answer the next day. And very often, after sleeping, after a good night's sleep, things are evacuated and digested and eliminated. We can also, in our research, look at the face of a person sleeping. For example, here we know exactly what the emotions are in this person. And for example, if you look at a baby sleeping, you can see them smiling sometimes earlier in sleep than in real life. So we observe the people sleeping. So here we have all these expressions. We can see smile. Sometimes people actually burst into laughter while sleeping. Sometimes you can feel the pain in their facial expression. And here we can see how fast we go from one emotion to the other. In real life, when you've just laughed, it lasts for a little while after you change expression, whereas in sleep, it's much quicker. So you have the first phase of reactivation, another one, second one of digestion. Well, we're just beginning, actually, to research all this. We're very far from the film in this respect. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc,
thank you. So this means that research on dreams has really progressed. And through this system of lucid dream, we are able now to see much better or clearer into dreams. What we know is obviously imperfect so far, but because we have so many models today, we can have hypotheses on the function of dreams. We know what the functions of sleep and dream is inserted within sleep, but we can see for emotions when it occurs, how fast, and for example, depressive people are not able to digest, in inverted commas, their emotions while they sleep. They wake up even more depressed. So what happens in their sleep so that the dysfunction is not activated? For example, creativity in dreams. How can we associate two things that are very different to create something new? And many researchers say that they discovered their discoveries in dreams. Mendeleev is often quoted his famous table, something he dreamt about. And then we have also slumber, reverie, when we start closing our eyes, where images bring in sleep, and it is the transition between awakening and sleep is very fruitful. So we were able to have people solving equations. It takes a lot of time, but there is a trick. So they started the way we show them, and then we asked them to have 30-minute breaks, and they had a bottle in their hands. And normally, when you sleep, you drop things, and very often the noise wakes you up. Some people went on sleeping, and 30% of people who had slight sleep are able to find a solution. 88% of the people who dropped the bottle and woke up found a solution. And the people who were immediately in paradoxical sleep were not able to. So what is at work during the brain while we're dreaming? We can see with oxygen conception or electricity what zones are working. Francesca Schilari were able to show that when we remember a dream, have a stronger activity of the posterior part of the brain, that is the visual part. This is fascinating, which means that one can influence professional dreamers, so to say, who dream like athletes, in order to communicate with the outer world. We know that Elon Musk dreams of being able to control our brains or our dreams. Do you think we'll progress in this direction? Well, this research is fascinating, but I do not agree with Elon Musk and this simplistic and mechanistic vision. This remains quite of a mystery. Here we have a material object, a brain, on the table, but how does it produce thoughts, feelings, emotions? We are extremely ignorant it's easier to have a man or a woman on Mars than to understand our inner world. So the neuronal code of consciousness is something that escapes from us. We've seen today how we can help people who are paralyzed to walk back again. We decode the sensorial emotions or perceptions. We can help people that are deaf or with implants, or help some who are blind. But the neuronal code of consciousness, something that escapes us. What really touches our personality, our memory, it's far more complicated. Before going back to dreams, I would like you to recall what is the role of sleep, because we talked of good management of emotions. What are the pathologies induced by a lack of sleep or bad quality of sleep?
The function of sleep has been studied for decades. It's a topic in neurosciences that has been studied for a long, long time in physiology in general. There's a first function, which is fairly intuitive and has been known throughout history. It's a time of rest, recovery. That appears obvious. We could study the metabolism of energy, the consumption of energy during sleep. And there's a paradox. You have REM sleep, for example, when you're deep asleep and the brain is very active, and it actually is so active you can see it in an ECG, and it looks like the same state as when you're awake, although the person is asleep. The consumption of energy is very high. It's similar to when you're awake. So it's a metabolic recovery phase. As we know, there are different phases in sleep. You have deep sleep, where probably you have a lot of metabolic recovery, and then you have the overactivation during REM sleep. You need a lot of energy to enter the phase of REM sleep. That's the first function, recovery. There's a function which has been proposed, and we have quite a lot of evidence. It's been validated, in fact. I'm referring to the idea that you eliminate toxins from the brain. You sort of clean the brain during sleep through a system. I didn't describe it myself, but it's called the glymphatic system. So there are glial cells. Yes, you have these glial cells. Sorry to go back to them. In fact, they connect to the sort of lymph system of the brain in order to get rid of the buildup of waste. People are still characterizing this system, but there is a certain amount of evidence pointing in this direction. And it's a form of neuroprotection. If you don't eliminate this waste, these toxic molecules, well, people haven't clarified that completely, neurons will be more vulnerable because you'll have this buildup of waste. So it's a very interesting path of discovery. You also have synaptic scaling, as they say in English. In other words, the synaptic resizing, rescaling. When you're awake, you create, through this brain plasticity system that we've been talking about, you create new synapses. And if you keep adding synapses when you're awake, the neurons will end up completely oversaturated. So the idea is to eliminate synapses that have been formed during the period when you're awake, and they're eliminated because they haven't been consolidated. The idea is to keep an effective and efficient scale or sizing of the synapses. So that, in general, are some of the ideas about the functions of sleep, but there are probably other ones too. Memory. You say you have to sleep on it, for example. It's good for the body as well. It's during sleep that we lose a lot of fat. That's why children have to sleep a lot. And if you don't sleep much, you get fatter. People say that children grow when they're asleep. Yes, the growth hormone is secreted mainly during the first 2 cycles of sleep. And children who don't sleep enough, who have big tonsils or terrible families, they don't grow as much. So it stabilizes the cardiovascular system. If you reduce the time of sleep, you'll develop hypertension. That's linked to the glucose system. You also develop diabetes. So if you sleep less, that exposes you to all sorts of problems for the body, not just the brain. But for the brain, sleep is by far and large the most important thing. A third of our life is taken up by sleep, and there are reasons for this. If you sleep badly, this has been shown, then you react differently to a vaccine, for example. So investing in good sleep is probably a very good idea. And in this day and age, you have to manage stress. If you're anxious, you'll end up sleeping less well. So you'll be even more anxious afterwards. So there's a sort of a vicious circle. It changes the way your brain system, the amygdala, for example, which regulates the emotions, it becomes very active. So it's not just taking a sleeping pill. You have to learn how to manage stress in today's society and invest in good sleep. That's very important. Good sleep. This is the last question, and then we'll take questions from the room. There's a paradox. I don't know whether it's a French one. People say that we are some of the leading users of sleeping pills in France and the world, yet at the same time people say the French don't sleep enough, that they lack sleep. It's a paradox. Yes, it's been clearly shown that people sleep less, particularly young people. We talked about the importance in young people of consolidating their memory. They're exposed to a lot of screen time. There's a huge depression rate in young people. It increased before COVID. It's a disaster. Young people have to sleep more. It's not a waste of time. They'll build up muscle. They'll become stronger. That's very important to underscore. Obviously, there are gadgets to try and sleep better. Our colleagues in Geneva have shown that if there's a rocking motion, you can increase memorization during sleep. Some try to listen to noises, regular noises in the ear, very soft noises, that train certain areas of the brain to enhance memory. But these are sort of gadgets. You just have to have enough time to sleep and enough time to dream. It's important for young people and less young people too. You have this idea that as you grow older, you can sleep less, and that's normal. At the same time, there are more and more studies which show that I don't sleep less because I'm growing older, but maybe I'm aging more because I'm not sleeping well enough. And if you treat sleep, this can have an impact. So sleep indeed is very, very important as a physical exercise, like physical exercise and good food. You have a list of factors, risk factors, or factors on which you can act to prevent neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, a healthy diet, physical exercise, mental exercise, and so on. A very important point is hearing devices so that you remain well connected and have a good social life. That's absolutely fundamental. in general. It's a factor that we can act on. A good hearing. This certainly has a major impact. And sleep as well. Sleep, good sleep is one of the areas where you can act. Thank you, Pierre. Are there any questions in the room on sleep and dreams? Go ahead. Good evening. Dreams at night. Sometimes you dream of having intercourse and an orgasm. This is often a taboo subject in Africa. For example, it's taboo in Africa if you have that kind of a dream. People say you're really bad if you tell them about it. If you have a fiancé or a husband, you have these night dreams, these wet dreams. That's what people often talk about. That's a very interesting point. You have to remember that during REM sleep, you have a natural erection in men and an erection of the clitoris in women. It's normal to be able to wake up a bit wet, and some men may even ejaculate involuntarily during sleep. The erection is not necessarily linked to erotic dreams. People sometimes fight lions with an erection in their dream. I'm not sure one should advise that in real life. But for about 10 years now, we have found that there are people who are sleepwalkers with sexual dreams. It's mainly men who sleepwalk and, in fact, harass people sexually during their sleep. There are more and more cases of this. Fewer and fewer women report orgasms during sleep, but sometimes you do observe this. What else should I say? There is a phenomenon which some of you may have experienced. You can't move. You wake up, you feel you're paralyzed, you can't move, whereas you have the impression you're fully awake. We call this sleep paralysis. It's usually unpleasant because you have the impression that you're a prisoner in your body. It lasts a minute or two. Sometimes you can have hallucinations, something that's crushing your chest, and it can be linked to the impression also of having having intercourse. That's what in Africa they talk about possession by the demon. I may reassure you, it's not a question of possession by the demon. It's a hybrid phenomenon. You have REM sleep, you feel this paralysis, and at the same time, you may feel a bit wet because that's just normal in this kind of sleep and dream. No, it's important to broach all these topics. Thank you very much for this very interesting series of statements. Historians have shown that for millions of years, people never slept for 10 hours straight. First of all, they slept when the sun went down, they woke up during the night, and they slept again until the sun came up. Currently, we have adapted to electricity, and I wonder whether this is a good thing. At the time, way back, life was quite cruel. Now, increasingly, we have a lot of stimuli, and maybe we need to readapt things and sleep in different bouts in order to clear away the neurotoxins and perhaps cope better with all these major stimuli. Thank you for this comment. Eklish, the historian, introduced this idea because he studied what happened before people had electricity. It's what we call medieval sleep. Before electricity, before light, people were working in the field. They did a lot of physical exercise, and at 7 p.m., candles were very expensive. People went to sleep at 7 o'clock in the evening. The children slept through until the next morning, because children can sleep about 12 hours. Adults went through the first 2 cycles of sleep, and they used to wake up an hour and a half or 3 hours later in the middle of the night, and then they would go back to sleep around 4:30 or 5 in the morning. And this, in the middle of the night, they were awake. And they were half asleep, half awake. People talked to each other, they prayed, they had intercourse, they finished the task they had to do. This exists, I said to Stephen. We studied the monks, and monks continue to have the same system. They sleep, go to sleep at 7 o'clock and sleep until midnight, and then pray and sleep again. With electricity, people started going to sleep much later. People switched off the lights at 10 or 11 p.m., and they don't wake up in the middle of the night. Some people still do. We reassure those people have 2 cycles, and they suddenly wake up and remain awake for an hour and a half. Well, I say you've got medieval sleep. Make the most of it. But sometimes it's not enough just to sleep for 2.5 hours, followed by 2.5 hours later on. But the invention of electricity greatly changed the sleep patterns of people. More recently, also the screens. These are blue LED lights. It's not natural light, and it simulates a sun for the body. If you look at the time on your mobile phone at night, people think this is nothing, but in fact, it tells your brain that it's noon. And it will, for a long time, block certain receptors in the retina, and it will keep you awake. So I would advise everyone to use red light at night, candles or whatever, but don't use screens. For people who sleep well, it's fine, but for those who don't sleep well, you should really avoid screens. If I can add an anecdote, I, for a couple of years, have spent my holidays in a place without electricities, and my quality of sleep is incomparable with the way I sleep elsewhere. I know there are questions in the room. I just wanted to know whether in a coma or under general anesthesia one dreams. Very good question. What you see when you measure electric activity is that there are slow waves, like in deep sleep, and there are no changes comparing day to night. We've also studied people who wake up, who are in a vegetative state, who don't respond. There are changes in behavior and in electrical activity. They also have erections. You don't have to be conscious to have an erection. And then you have people who are in this intermediate state. It's a state of minimal consciousness. It's difficult to apply the typical criteria of a REM sleep, but you can see that there's eye movement, paralysis of the muscles, and probably they do have REM sleep. And probably, but we can't ask them, they do probably dream, and that's a prognostic marker. One last question? Yes, up in the back. We'll give you a microphone. Is it just a myth that some dreams tell you what's going to happen in the future? If you ask someone in the room whether they've had a dream that has told them about the future, most people will say yes, they have. But when you look into the details, it's far more complex than what people think. Either people think that these premonitory dreams come from God, or you think about matter and you say every night, we create a number of scenarios in the brain, a huge and extraordinary number. When you see what people remember and what you see at night, there's a huge gap. People say, how many dreams do you have per night? It may be 15 to 20. And real dreamers will say, I have huge amounts of dreams. It's like a second life, which they incorporate lots of things from what happened during the day or longer ago. And paradoxically, things that you didn't necessarily pay attention during the day, but which are reconstituted differently during sleep. we have a brain that constantly creates stimulation threats, and every so often these simulations, a simulation may really happen the next day. Sometimes you may think that that person was a bit pale, and you say, oh, you didn't pay attention to your dream. When you wake up, the person is sick, has cancer. She learns that the next day. That's not just, not all premonitory dreams are like that, but you can explain it in that way. It's an a posteriori validation of a dream. That means that we have hundreds of thousands of dreams stored away somewhere in our brain. And we don't have access to this unless a particular path or link occurs with something that happens during the day. Yes, we have this huge hard drive in our mind. Look at people who talk in their brain, in their sleep. They wake up the next morning, don't remember it. But if I say Michael to you, can we find some link with your dream? Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you, Stefan. I think we can give our speakers a round of applause. So perhaps you'd like to go back to your seats, and Pierre, you could wind up the afternoon. Well, this brings us to the end of the afternoon. I think we can say it's been a very full afternoon, full of information, full of discussions, which I'm sure will have stimulated all our brains. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for having come to attend the lectures. And also, I think it's very important, I would like to thank the Foundation, Magnolia, for the support for all these activities. And in particular, I'd like to thank Alessandro, who has developed this initiative, which I think is extremely useful and interesting. And also, perhaps I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I look forward to seeing you all again in 2 years' time for another cerebral man or woman. We'll see. And thank you also to the Minister for having spent the afternoon with us. I know that you have a very full schedule, so that is greatly appreciated. So there we have it. Continue socializing after learning so much, learning all this information. There's a cocktail party with the signing of books, because some of the participants in the debate have also written books, and they're here and will be happy to sign their book if you like. And the speakers, of course, will be at the cocktail party if you want to continue discussing matters with them. But the day is not totally finished yet. It's the International Day for the Rights of Women. I should like to ask our female participants to come back to the rostrum just one more time. Could you join us up here? Because we have something for you.
Merci. Voilà, on voulait...
There we are. I think we can give you these bunches of flowers and give you a good round of applause. I'd like to thank all our experts and all our specialists for coming to attend the afternoon session. Thank you to the Foundation. Thank you, Pierre. And we can continue our discussions outside during the cocktail party, which will follow. Thank you very much.
Voilà, un beau bouquet. Pardon ?